How expensive can I make this cheap pedal kit? Today I'll be turning a £15 auto wah kit into a boutique funk monster. I'll be changing out all of the standard components for vintage, mojo and anything I can get my hands on. Will this pedal sound more expensive or will it just cost more? Let's find out. And this is the stuff we're going to be using to build our C-Moon funk machine. Now this is the kit. And I could just use everything in this kit, but as we all know, I'm not going to. I'm clearly going to change them all up for something a bit different. Well, let's have a look. You get a decent power jack. I'll probably save that for a different build. Here's all of our pots. Now, there's nothing wrong with the capacitors in this packet. They all seem fairly well made or have a high quality. I'll probably use the electrolytics. However, when it comes to these box film caps, just because I'm probably going to change them out for something a bit more, well, a bit larger, shall we say. But we'll cross them as we come to it. And then this op amp isn't going to change. I don't think I've got anything that I can replace that with. And then same with the resistors, as we see. These are just standard metal film resistors, half a watt metal film resistors. I'll probably change some of them out for ones that I've got in, you know, fancier shapes and sizes. Why not? As previous videos, we know that these stomp switches are actually pretty decent, although I seem to have bent, if you can see that, I've bent one of the pins on this one, probably where I've been storing it in a workshop. Oops, sorry. BitsBox, who provide these kits, have given us this rather large Vero board, and I'm probably only going to use a small amount of it, so you do get some extra. If this is one of your first pedal builds, then you'll have enough to build something else with your spare components or with other components you've got, so that's good. Now, let's get on to cutting the board down. I almost forgot to mention, of course we are doing a C-Moon funk machine with auto wah pedal. I thought I'd go with something a little bit C orientated for the artwork. This was sent to me as custom artwork from a customer for the dual delay pedal, I believe, or it was a large pedal anyway. And I printed a few sizes of the artwork because I wasn't sure how big it was going to, you know, sit on the pedal. This is one of the ones I had left over. I really like how it looks on this enclosure. What do we think? Now, I know someone's going to tell me the artist that drew this, and I think it's part of a cartoon or it's part of some sort of modern art, whatever. So if anyone knows what this is, please write it in the comments and remind me. If you can't tell, I'm loving these BitsBox kits at the minute. They're Stripboard, so it's almost like making your own boutique pedal without using a PCB or any of the stuff that I normally hate. If you're enjoying these pedal builds, please consider subscribing to the channel. It'll help my channel grow, and as I grow, I'll be able to offer you better and more content. On a Zen Drive video I filmed, I handily had someone say, why don't I use my phone to flip the screen on, or flip over the picture of the underside of the board, so then I could just mark it out on the top and it would be correct to the bottom. Now, I had to go at this and I just couldn't do it, basically. I'm set in my ways and I've been doing it this way for a very long time, so I'm going to go ahead and show you my way of doing these boards. We want 18 holes across the top here, so I count out 19. 1, 2, 3, 19. Right, so on the 19th hole, I'll make a line. And now going down, we want 15 holes, so I'll count 16 down.
2,000 years later.
I'll make a line there. Now I know that if I cut along here and cut along here, the piece that drops out is going to be the right size for my circuit board. Before we go any further, I'll put the layout of this pedal on the screen now. So get ready to take your screenshot now while it's up, or mark this time and you'll be able to refer back to it while you're building your pedal. I'm going to go ahead now and just use my hacksaw blade as ever. Apologies to everyone who thinks that this is a bit archaic. I should use something else, like maybe, I don't know, a proper saw. But this is what I use anyway. I'm going to go ahead and cut this up. Now that we have it cut out, what we're going to do is refer back to the underside picture of our layout, which is the right hand side of the pedal. This shows you exactly where all of the cuts under the board are going to be. But remember, we're looking at it from a top down view. So we're looking at this side of the board and not the copper trace side. Okay, so if we're looking at the top side of the board, what I like to do is mark it out with some sort of pen. I usually like to use a marker pen, as stated in my previous build video. However, I can't find that marker pen, so I am using a chrome marker pen, whatever that is. And the first cuts we're going to do are 4 holes across on the top row is the first one. 1, 2, 3, 4. What I like to do is just dab it like this. I leave a little dab on the top, and that way when I come to put components in later I can see it's there. But also if I turn it through the underside of the board, I can kind of look through and see where it is. So when I'm creating the trace cuts in the copper side of the board, I know where I'm going and I'm going to get it right. Again, previously someone mentioned using your phone to flip the picture over, and I could just draw on this side of the copper board without having to count backwards. Great idea, but I couldn't do it. My brain is too old, and I find this way really easy. And now I know that the next cut is going to be one below this one, as you can see on our drawing. So I'll just dab that too, and in that way I know I've got 2 cuts there. When I flip it over, I can cut them. I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of the red dots on our drawing. Now that we have all the traces marked out on the top side of our board, I'm going to go ahead to the underside of the board, take my Stanley knife. Now, before anyone says it, thank you for your concern about me cutting my hand off or something. I've been using these for many years, and I've not really had any problems. I know people don't like me fiddling with them or whatever. There you go. But you can use a drill bit to mark out these out, and there's some other handy tools to use, but I just like to use this. If we look at our top side of our board, we're going to go across and put the Stanley blade inside the hole that we're going to cut, and I like to turn it over and give it a little check and make sure I'm in the right one, which I am. And then I just use the blade in a kind of circular motion and cut the traces either side of the hole. And that way there's a break in the copper, which is then a break in our circuit and stops 2 components from connecting together, like so. When I'm doing this top row and we have this extra strip of copper going over the top, I like to just cut that extra strip of copper too. Now this isn't essential because, you know, all these copper strips are next to another copper strip, but sometimes I find, because there isn't holes in this one, I'm a little bit lax about like not jumpering anything over to it. So when I'm soldering, I may end up with a little jumper over to this and inadvertently attach 2 parts of the circuit together that I don't want to do. So I just like to give that trace that extra cut, and then that way there's no chance of that happening. I'm going to go ahead and just cut out the traces for all of these, and then we'll take a look at the jumpers. There's all of our traces cut, and as you can see, it matches this side here, only the opposite way round. Now the next thing you'll notice on the right hand side of our drawing is that these little black lines going from top to bottom, these are little links. So it's basically like putting a component in with no component whatsoever, and it's just wire. You can use your normal wire, which I don't normally do. I normally use component legs from old builds. However, for this one here, I'm going to go ahead and use component wire just to be a little bit different. The first thing we can see on here is there's one large trace going straight down the center of the board. It starts at the top here, and there's a little blue dot just here, which is on the top cut of these 3 in a row. That means that the 2 links join together that go in that hole, and then there's another link that comes all the way down to the bottom. So first things first, I'm going to cut out 2 lengths of wire, one long enough to reach the top part and another long enough to reach the bottom part, like so. Then all I do is I match them up in length, take my snips and strip them down, then twist them together, and then take my soldering iron, wet the tip, hey! Again folks, don't forget you can get wet the tip t-shirts down below. And then I use the soldering iron just to tin that wire there. Now this bit here can go inside our link, so that little blue dot can be, I haven't Tin that very well, have I? Well done, Joe. The little blue dot, we can put our meeting point of our wires in there. And then if I was to solder that in, like so. Just tidy it up there. There's our link part done. Now all we need to do is cut the wire to length and strip it at the right length to fit in them holes without leaving any overhang and without leaving it like sticking up off the board for miles. And we have our link complete. I'm just going to go ahead and tin the ends of them and put them in the relevant holes, and that'll be our first link done. This is what it looks like with all of the links in place now. There is 2 sets of double links, so we have both of them going into this hole here and then again over here. I ended up stripping the insulation off this one for no reason than I did it by mistake. Here's some of the resistors and ones I'm going to be changing them out for. Our kit comes with this style. Here's a 470k resistor. I'm going to be using these vintage Philips 470k resistors. I usually save these up for my Rangemaster builds, but there you go. And then 2.2 meg resistors. I'm going to be using these old carbon comps. Then there's these 47k resistors. I seem to only be able to find 2 of them in the kit. I need 3. I think I may have dropped one when I was getting the kit out. Well done, Joe. I'm going to be changing them for these tantalum resistors. Now these are hideously expensive. Yeah, I have no reason to swap these out, by the way. They'll probably sound just as good, if not better, with these. It's me. I like to use large components or unusual components. Here we have our 4.7k resistors, and I'm using these high precision 4.7k. Again, hideously expensive and unnecessary for a guitar pedal build, but that's what I'm doing. And again, our 10k resistor, I'm swapping it out just for this larger 10k resistor. No other reason than I think it'll look better on the board. I like to start with the resistors usually because they're lower profile on the board, which means that it's easier to work around them once they're in. Of course, I'm going to have to fit these probably in a manner in some places that makes them stick off the board, which kind of makes it pointless starting with the resistors if I'm honest, but that's what I'm going to do. Usually for my pedal builds, I like to check every component just to make sure that I'm in the ballpark or pretty much bang on the resistance or capacitance that I want for that component. To do this, I use my Fluke 101 multimeter. Fantastic bit of kit this. It does capacitors, it does resistance, it does diodes, basically everything I need it for. This particular one is bomb proof. It's been round the world with me. If you want one of these, I'll put an affiliates link in the description. I do get a kickback from that from Amazon, but there's no extra charge to yourselves. Right, I'm going to switch this over to ohms over here. Take my 2 leads, place them either side of the capacitor. I keep going to say capacitor. Either side of the resistor, and we can see that this is 46.5k, which is close enough for government work for what I'm doing. That's that resistor. And then if I wanted to check them all, I'll just do the same. Now obviously I've checked all these off camera to make sure they're in the ballpark. 46.9. And then that way when you're checking each component, this is one thing that that caught me out in the beginning. I was putting components on the board and I had no clue whether they were actually the right components. I was just relying on the colour bands. I didn't know if they drifted over time, or maybe someone sent me the wrong resistor in a kit and I've just blindly put it in. And you end up chasing your tail trying to find out what's wrong. It's really hard to find something like that once it's in the pedal. So I'm going to go ahead and start from upper left, going across, and then down, and then across, and just add in every resistor along the way. So first things first, it's going to be one of these hideously expensive 47k resistors. You'll no doubt hear from my horrific breathing today. I've got a bit of a chest infection. Don't know what's going on, it's going round. I've got young kids and they seem to bring it all home with them. Now, because these are old resistors, I'm going to clean the legs. I either like to do that with my Nipex snips, or sometimes I'll use a Stanley blade when people aren't telling me off for using them and just give the ends a scrape. That's how I used to do it. But since finding these Nipex nips, they're so good, I just, you know, run them along the end. Now our first component, our 47K, is going on the top row next to the 2 cuts that we made. It's going in the hole next to them. And I'm going to stand it up like this and run it the old Ibanez way and bend this over to meet the next hole. So if I bend that over like this is how Ibanez fit them in the old Tube Screamer pedals. It just looks really cool. And as we know, we hear with our eyes. So you open this pedal up, see these resistors put in this way, it'll sound better to you. It just will, I promise you. Right, okay, so this resistor goes in and it has three rows gapped underneath it. So if I put it in here, count out 3 rows, 1, 2, 3, and then it goes in just there. And I'm going to situate it like that, so then it's sitting up. I bend both of the legs out slightly, so then it's not going to come out the top of the board, and then I can just solder the bottom like so. Another thing I find is that if you have really thick component legs, the solder trace heats up a lot quicker than the leg when you're soldering. You touch your iron to both the leg and the trace. So I'll wet the tip, I'll touch the leg of the component higher up with the solder and the tip together, and I slide both down and meet the board at the same time with our solder and our iron, and you get a really good joint because the leg is heated up and the solder, the copper trace heats up really quick because it's thin, and you get a good joint. And as you can see there, that's not too shabby. Another handy little tip when you're choosing how to lay out your components. If you get up the layout on the screen now, you can see over here this 10K resistor. Right, one end of it is just sitting next to basically nothing apart from the op amp and some resistors, and the other end is going to sit next to it, a 10 UF cap. So when I'm situating the body of the resistor like this, I'm going to put it away from the 10 UF cap because that's a rather large cap, and this sitting next to it, they're going to rub up against each other. Whereas if I situate it the opposite end, it's going to have a bit of space around it. So one, it's going to be easy for me to fit all the components in, and 2, you're not going to get any of that electrical interference. I mean, I know that may not really affect guitar effects pedals per se because there's not much voltage or current there. However, why not just make it easy for yourself? It's all of our resistors now in place. You can see that I did use 2 of the resistors from the kit, and that was a 33K and 100 ohm. That's because I didn't have any suitable ones in spec that I wanted to use for it. Basically, I mean, when you're building this kit, if you choose to build it, you can use all of the original resistors and it'll sound just as good. I'm pretty sure of that. Right, next bit is to add in our 2 diodes, D1 and D2. D2's going up here somewhere and D1 down here. Now, as ever, these diodes are polar. There's a stripe around one end, and that's the cathode, and there's the no stripe end, which is the anode. You can see on our drawing, if we put it up on the screen now, that we have them facing in opposite direction. D2 as the negatively charged portion, negatively charged. That's probably the worst way to say that in electrical terms, but the cathode of it is pointing up and the anode is pointing down, and on D1 it's the opposite way round. We've got our little stripe pointing towards the bottom of the circuit. Now you can, as ever, test these diodes to make sure they work. So on my Fluke 101, I'll flip it round to the ohm sign and then press the yellow button twice. That puts it in diode testing mode. Clever this. Now we take our negative or our black lead and place it on the side with the stripe, and our positive lead, the red lead, on the opposite side, and we can see that this diode has a forward voltage of 0.56 volts. Good. And then the other one, 0.58 volts. That would let us know that this diode is working correctly, basically, and they're both pretty similar. If they were wildly different, I'd be starting to go online and find out what the right forward voltage for this diode is. Now, if we were to swap our leads over, if you got them the wrong way round, don't panic. but the diode doesn't work. It doesn't put out any voltage at all, and that's because you've got to imagine that this is kind of like a country gate with one of them little flick backs in to stop the cows getting out. I mean, I'm not a country guy, as you can probably tell from my accent, but you can go inside the field one way and the gate will open, but if you try and get out the other way, the gate shuts and it won't let it through. If you imagine that these are pretty much the same, let's the electricity through one way but not the other. There's much more to it than that, but that makes sense to me in my mechanical minded way. I mean, generally speaking, unless you're using germanium diodes, they don't normally go out of spec, but it's just good to test them all, because then when you come to building your pedal, you don't turn it on, nothing happens, it doesn't work, and then you're going to start the fault finding process. This just eliminates all of that before you'd even start. So I'm going to clean both the legs because they're looking a bit crusty. Now, to fit these diodes, I don't usually stand them up. I do fit them against the board. So if we look at D2 first, I'll bend both the legs flat. I'll orientate the diode so I know I want my line pointing upwards. And it's going in a row next to 33K at the top here. And I can see that there's 2 holes in the middle of it, and then it goes in. And now before I push it all the way down, I'll just have another count and make sure that it goes in the top row. Yes, it does. There's 2 gaps in the middle, 1, 2, yes there is, and then it goes in, and right underneath it is a 2.2 meg resistor. Yes there is. So I know that that's in the right position. I'll push it down and then bend the legs out slightly. I mean, I did show in my Zen Drive video a couple of ways to solder things to these Vero boards, but this is the method I'm going to use for this one. And now I know that's in place, I can go ahead and do the same for the next diode, but this time remembering that the line is going to be pointing down on our circuit board. On our strip board. Circuit board makes it sound a little bit too modern, as someone pointed out on one of my last videos. Now I know this goes right in this column here, which is 3 holes from the end, 1, 2, 3. So it's this row here, or this column here, and there's 4 holes down, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it goes in there, and there's 2 gaps underneath it. So it slots in like so. And then all I'm going to do to check this one is make sure that there is 2 gaps in the middle of it. 1, 2, yes there is. And then I'm going to count the holes going down to the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now if we get our schematic up and have a look, or our layout, we can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 holes below. So the chances are that's in the right position. One last little check to make sure I've got the line pointing down. The amount of times that I've built pedals in the past that don't work because I've orientated the diode wrong, usually one of the super hard on clones or something like that, every single time I seem to mess them up. Anyway, now that they're in there, I can just wet the tip and give them a solder. Using the same method of running down the leg, because the legs on these diodes are a little bit thick, but you don't want to hang about on there with the iron for too long, because diodes, much like pots and transistors, can be the ones that fail with too much heat, especially germanium. I mean, these power diodes aren't too bad, but the germanium ones, my lord, you better be careful. I've got a good batch of Soviet germanium diodes at the minute. I think they're like D9E, I think they're called. Brilliant. I'll be using them in a few builds coming up. But yeah, there's our diodes now fitted to the board. At this point, we are ready to go with our capacitors. However, one thing I have missed, which looking at it now, I like to do before everything else, and that is the socket for the op amp. So I like to put that in first so I can orientate things around it. I've missed it off. You don't get a socket with this kit, but they cost like pence. So I advise buying a socket just to save you soldering the legs of this, because A, they're easy to burn and burn out the IC, and B, you can chop and change it for other ones in the future and see which works best. So I'm going to go ahead and get myself an IC socket and fit it now. As ever, I'm going to swap out all of the capacitors because this is my favourite bit, using crazy capacitors. I've got these 4.7 NF Erie caps that are going to go in there. This old 1 NF cap, I can't remember where I sourced this one from, but that'll fit in the circuit nicely. Next, a 47 NF cap. I like these TCC caps, they're really good. I think it was Mike from Seeker who started using these that put me onto them. I seen them inside his pedal and I was like, I need them in my life. So there we go. And then arguably worse than the ones that are going in there in a sense of audio are these ceramic caps, box ceramic caps. I really like them. The 100 NF. I like how these sound. I like how they look. I'm going to use them. And then for the input cap, which is also 100 NF, the pièce de la résistance is this audio grade capacitor from Clarity Caps. It's a modern cap made to impeccable standards. It's massive, so it won't fit on the board. I mean, look at the size of it to the board. Basically impossible. I'm going to try and use this as the input cap and run wires from the board to this, and I'm going to mount it inside the enclosure. Now, I'm just going to do a quick test because here's our enclosure. I'm just going to make sure that A, I can fit it in here and it won't foul the top, yes. And B, I can get my circuit in here. I think that's going to be quite good, or maybe I'll fit it down here and the circuit can be here. Something like that. But either way, I really like the idea of having this cap first in the circuit. It's what your signal is going to see straight away. And, you know, it's meant for hi-fi amplifiers and stuff like that, like valve amplifiers. So I think it's a nice touch. I'm just going to put it in there. I'm sure I'll get lots of hate off the internet. Now, where to start? I'm going to start off in the top left corner with a 4.7 NF Erie cap. Now, these old Erie caps they used to come in like old valve radios and stuff. They're not the strongest things in the world anymore. They've been around for many years. If I go yanking on them with this, chances are I might pull, there's only a solder joint holding it together, I might pull that apart. So I am going to use the Stanley knife method on these ones. People may say, why are you putting it in a pedal if it's old and fragile? Well, look at this, we're all old and fragile. Well, the thing is, they look and sound good. And once they're in the circuit up against the board, they're pretty solid. There's no, you know, it's not going to fail anytime soon. So I'm going to put that in there, and I can see it is in the second row along, one down from the top with one space in the middle. So that means I'm going to have to fit it like I fit my resistors, which is standing up on end like so. And it's going to go second row along, one down from the top in, and there's one hole in the middle of the two legs. It sounds like I'm talking gibberish, doesn't it? But if this doesn't make sense, please let me know in the comments, and I will try and answer it in a way that makes sense. So there's one hole gap at the top, yes. The lead goes in, then there's another gap, yes. And then the second lead goes in. Fine. So now we can just space our component legs out. That is in place, and I'll solder that in. There's our three 4.7 NF caps fitted in the top left hand side of the board, as you've no doubt seen them on the layout. Next is this 1 NF cap, which is going to fit over here. Now, if I flip back to the layout, you can see that this is going to put up right next to a 100 UF capacitor at the top here. It'd be much better for the body of this capacitor to be lower down. However, then you see that it puts up against another 10 UF capacitor right next to it there. So there's literally no escaping capacitors in this one. However, if we think about this capacitor at the bottom, that's next to more components than the 100 UF is at the top. So I'm going to put the body of this 1 NF towards the top. And then maybe instead of pointing straight up, I might angle it towards the middle. So it's kind of like a V shape upside down, just because that way it will keep the body out of the way of everything else. Next, we're going to fit our 47 NF cap. And as you can see, there's only one hole spacing between the legs of the cap. But if we look at the cap here, we can see that there's roughly 3 hole spacing as the cap stands now. So how to get round this, and I'm sure I've shown this before, is with the longest leg bent back on itself, you can hold it up against the board, put the straight leg in one hole, and then you can use your amazing Nipex snips if you've got them, if not any regular snips. You can measure along and just grab hold of the component leg at the right point of there being one hole spacing in between them, and then bend it over, and you get this sort of shape. And then that way, when you offer up to your board, which I know it's going in over here, one below this trace cut, you can see that there is in fact one hole spacing beneath this. Now when I'm positioning in here, I'm looking at the board, or I'm looking at my schematic, or rather my layout. I keep going to say schematic. I'm looking at my layout and I can see that there's no components to the right hand side of this at all. So I can put the overhanging bit to the right hand side and there's going to be no issue. It'll sit on the board nicely there. Okay, so annoyingly I jumped the gun on this one. I did position it down here, in which case there wasn't anything sitting next to it. However, it actually goes one row up. If I'm not chucking the capacitor away, it actually goes one row up and it sits at the bottom of this 2.2 meg resistor, and it jumpers this hole just here. And if it goes in here like it does fit nicely. However, we can see that it's going to foul the leg of this resistor if I push it all the way down. So what I'm going to do is just raise it up a bit. You've got plenty of space in our enclosure. I'll raise it off the board as such, and that way it's got space to sit above this resistor leg. Now we're on to our 100 NF capacitors, and as stated before, I'm using these box capacitors. This one here particularly is going to go one up from the bottom and 4 holes along, which I'm going to situate it there. And there's also a 1 hole gap in the middle, so it'll fit in just like that. And just to double check, I'll check that there's 1 hole below it. Yes, there is. 1 hole in the middle of the legs. Yes, there is. And then counting to the sides, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can see that there's 4 holes coming to the end of here, so I know I've positioned it right. Then if I bend my legs out slightly, I know I've got that in the right position. And likewise, the one that's going to sit at the opposite side of the board is 3 holes from the end. So 1, 2, 3, and then it goes in. There's a 1 hole gap in the middle. Hopefully by now in these build videos, the whole talking gibberish is kind of making sense to you. So there should be 1 hole in the middle of it. Yes, there is. And it goes in and it attaches right next to that 447k resistor, which it does. 3 holes to the end. I know I've got it in the right position, so I can situate it there. Now I can solder both of these in and we're ready to go for our final capacitor. Or no, tell a lie. We're ready to go for our final signal carrying capacitor. Now if you remember, I said this is going to be our input capacitor. So rather than mounting it on the board, we're going to mount it off board because of the size of the thing. What we could do is we could go straight from our switch to this capacitor and then to the input of the pedal, and that would be absolutely fine. We could put a little jumper in the capacitor's place and that would work. However, in the Navy we have a saying, it's called KISS, keep it simple stupid, and generally what it means is if you overcomplicate things, you're going to mess up. So do it the simplest way, and that way when the bombs are dropping, you'll remember how to do it. So rather than doing all of that, I'm just going to sack that off and I'm going to run wires from where the capacitor attaches to the board. I'm just going to run 2 longer lengths of wire. I mean, I definitely won't need that much wire, but if I do 2 lengths of that, it'll definitely reach. And I'm just going to plug in wires where the legs of that are supposed to go. And then that way later on I can just run the wires to this capacitor without having to think too much, because if I'm honest, I'm not that familiar with the circuit. It's the first time I've ever built it. I don't want to overcomplicate things and have a mistake, basically just trying to be fancy. So right, I'll get them attached and then we'll move on to the electrolytics. There's the wires in place for our clarity cap. Now I'm going to move on to the electrolytics. So for the electrolytics, we've got these 2 10NF capacitors, electrolytics, which, you know, these are pretty good quality. I see no reason to change them out. And then again, this 100 10NF, I said 10NF then, 10 UF, 10 microfarad. There you go, I'm proving everyone right. I shouldn't say UF, I should say micro, because I messed it up there. Well done, internet, you proved me wrong. So there's a 100 NF, 100, I'm doing it again now, I'm going to do this all day. There's a 100 microfarad, 100 UF capacitor. I see no reason to change this either. It's quite a slim body on it and this is a busy build, so I'm going to go ahead and use it. These are polar, as previously stated. How we can tell, 2 ways. First way is we've got this band down one side, which denotes the negative leg. And also the positive leg is longer than the negative leg. And if we look at our 100 microfarad, 100 UF capacitor on our layout, we can see that the negative wants to point down. So if I orientate it down, hold it up against the board, I can see that this is going to go over from the top, miss a row, and go in next to our 1 NF capacitor with a negative anode pointing down. And that looks correct to me. So I'm just going to slide that down, and I'm going to try and position the body of it higher up on the board to keep it away from this 1 NF capacitor. As we said before, they're sitting close together. There we are. I'll get that soldered in. Just do the same thing for our 10 UF capacitors now. So we've got our negative side on the first one that's going to go in the top. Negative side is again pointing down. This time it's going to go the second row down and right in line with this last pin here of our op amp next to our 10k resistor, and it's just going to slot in there like that. And hopefully we'll be able to get our IC in there with no problem as well, which is why we always fit this IC board before these caps, because then you can kind of position them round it. Right, so while that one's in place, I'm going to take the last 10 UF capacitor, and that goes the opposite side handily and really close to everything else, pain in the arse. That goes right next to this 1 NF cap here, with again a negative pointing down, so our shorter leg, or the side with the band on it, pointing down. So the positive leg goes directly underneath the 1 NF this time, and there's no gaps between the middle, so it slots in there. Now, if I was to keep the leg straight, the cap sits like this, kind of wonky, so you can that shows you how tight the space is next to this. I'm just going to bend it, so then it's sitting a little bit off the board, but it's looking a little bit straighter. I'll be able to manipulate that into place in a bit. Now, here's another interesting thing. So I'm about to solder this here with the legs sort of pointing not in the same direction as me. So when I go to solder these in the center of these electrolytics, there's not much space between the traces, and so when I solder this trace, I'm likely going to solder this trace at the same time and join them together. So if I flip the board 90 degrees, what I'll be able to do is, when I'm soldering, my iron is nowhere near the trace that's below it, or the trace that's next to it. My iron's off to the side, and then again when I want to do this one, I flip it round, so my iron's kind of away from all the legs. The amount of times that I've soldered two of these together, and then when you try and fix it, you put loads of heat in the board and you solder more bits together, it's a nightmare. And if you're anything like me, you'll end up soldering 1,000 traces together. All right, I'm exaggerating. Soldering more than one trace together, trying to fix the problem that you caused in the first place, when really all you do is just position the iron differently, and you can get in there. Now, if I bend them in place, they're not perfect, they're not exactly straight, but they're okay. It kind of looks like they're all flanking the op amp just to make it hard for you to fit it in there later on, which is why I think they laid the board out like this. Cheers, Mark, whoever that is. Actually, you do have to say cheers to Mark, because whoever made these layout drawings, he's prolific. He's done a drawing for literally every pedal that I love. Brilliant. Now we're moving on to our transistors, or FETs. So Q1 and 2 on the drawing says that it is a BF245. They've given us in this kit 2N5458, which are also FETs, and also they are pretty much exactly the same. Now, everyone knows that you can use it, well, everyone doesn't know, you can use a transistor tester to test the legs of these, but the DCA55 doesn't do FETs very well. However, ChatGPT, on the other hand, will be able to tell me if the so if I write, is the BF245 pinout the same as the 2N, what was this, 454 yeah, 54, sorry, 2M5458, that's the ones. dyslexia kicking in there. 2N5458. Now if I ask ChatGPT, I won't even need to search it online and have a look. So there we can see they're the opposite way round. So pin 3 is the gate and pin 1 is the drain on a 5458, and pin 1 is the source and pin 3 is the drain on the BF245. So we'll need to flip our FETs the opposite way round. I'm just going to go away and double check that with my tester, just in case ChatGPT is lying to me, but I'm pretty certain that that's right. And it does say consult the data sheets, which, you know, makes sense. Okay, so looking online, it seems like ChatGPT was correct. However, I'm very visual in my learning and understanding process, so I have to see it. Now, the DCA55 is a great transistor tester. It's, you know, it's what I use for everything, but it doesn't do JFETs. If you do want one of these, I do have an affiliates link in the description below. Again, it's for Amazon, and I get a little kickback, no extra charge to yourself. I seriously wouldn't be building, especially germanium effects pedals, without one of these. I know you can build your own tester kit and do some maths and stuff. It's just not for me, but this works for most transistors. However, on a FET, it doesn't do them all. It doesn't do every single FET. Every single part of the FET. So it's telling us it's an N-channel FET, yeah, we know. And it says that it can't identify the drain or the source, but it can identify the gate. Now, if we look here, it's saying the green leg, this one here, is the gate. So that means that, looking at our drawing, the two FETs at the bottom, the gate is situated at the top. So if we put the gate at the top, we can see that this transistor actually goes in the opposite way round to the ones on the drawing, because the gate is at the top and that is the opposite way round. So with both ChatGPT telling me and my DCA55 telling me that these go in the opposite way round, I'm pretty confident that I can put them in the opposite way round and it will work. Handily, BitsBox come to the rescue with these transistors, or these FETs. They actually says this kit uses 2N5458 JFETs to replace the BF245s. These need to be turned 180 degrees to fit. So there you go. Because I'm a man, a typical man, and I don't read instructions, I completely missed that. Now, what I also missed was that the 47K in the top left of the layout, which is this resistor here, is replaced with the 390K to allow the use of a 1 meg frequency pot. Now, on the drawing, it says that our frequency pot is 5 meg, and we've been given a 1 meg, so they actually give us a different resistor to facilitate that, and I didn't even read it, and I've gone ahead and fitted the incorrect resistor in there. So first things first, I'm going to tidy up the legs of these two FETs, then I'm going to change out this resistor for the correct value. Well done, Joe. At least we found it in the end, before we put it in the pedal and it never worked properly, and I look like an idiot. More of an idiot. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so there's our 47K resistor now swapped for the 390K. For those interested, I did reclaim this I need to say capacitor again then, this tantalum resistor, because they are hideously expensive, so don't worry, I will reuse that in a future build. Now onto our final transistor, which on the drawing it's telling us is a 2N5088, which is just a standard NPN transistor. So we can put this in the way it shows us on the drawing, which is the emitter to the top, base in the middle, and collector at the bottom. I will, of course, test this on my DCA55 just to make sure, but we can go ahead and fit that on. That's all of our onboard components fitted, and we are ready to go with our wires. What I like to do is just count out the number of wires down each side, pull out lengths of wire. I always pull out a reasonable length because I'm not worried about having too much waste. I've got a ton of this wire, and I know it's not cheap, but still, I'll cut out a load of wire, I'll snip them, and then I'll solder them all in, and that way when I fit this in a board I can just connect all these wires up and there should be enough wire to reach where it needs to go. Here's all of our wires attached. ready to go in the board, ready to go in the enclosure, and then be wired up where it needs to go. Now, I used to leave the op-amp fitting until the very end, so then you don't put any heat in the board with the op-amp on there, but it's a bit of a pain to get it into position while it's in the enclosure, so I'm going to go ahead and fit it now. As ever, these op-amps come with the legs flayed slightly, so if you just give the legs, the pins, a little bit of a squeeze, then it'll go in there nicely. If you look at our drawing, in the top of the drawing, there's like a nick in the op-amp. And that denotes the top of it, and to match that up with our op-amp itself, you can see that there's a dot in the corner here, the upper left corner, so we want that dot to match up with the nick on the drawing, so this is going to go pointing upwards. And so if I position that in there roughly and use my snips very gently and don't squeeze too hard and cut the leg like I normally do, and position it in, and just make sure that all the legs are going into the socket holes, and then give it a push down. Now I can see that I've kind of messed this up. I need to manipulate the legs a little bit to get them in. There we are. Give it a squeeze, and that way I can get right in there and make sure it's sat low down right in the socket, which it is. On a side note, has anyone ever bought any Boss patch cables before? You get these little handy screwdrivers with them. They're fantastic. I forgot I even had it. Anyway, that's all of our hardware now fitted to our pedal. I did of course not use the white PTFE washer, although on this pedal it probably would have looked quite good to have a white PTFE washer on there, but I didn't. And also I didn't use the jack, the DC jack, even though this is an extremely high quality one, probably better quality than the one that I've used arguably, but I wanted to use a white one. I think it looks good with the H pink. Now it's time to deal with the mess inside this enclosure. What I like to do is start off somewhere on the left hand side around the top, just because that's how I read. I'm going to take this wire and we're just going to start one by one populating them to where they need to go. Now I can see that this one goes to frequency 1 and 2. So 1 and 2, because the pedal is upside down and the pots are in upside down, number 1 is this side here and number 3 is this side here, even though conventional thinking you would think 1 starts on the left and moves to the right like we read, but because it's upside down, this is number 1 here. And so this wire here pins the frequency number 1 and number 2 together, and rather than running it through the center here and going straight in, which I could do, it's going to be a tight squeeze there, especially if I've got all of these wires going through. So I'm just going to run it round the outside edge of the enclosure and then back on itself down here, and that way when I create a wiring loom, as you like, and put some cable ties around it, all the wires are going to go together and then just drop off into their relevant pots. And I've got to wire these jacks in anyway, so I'm going to have to put a wire around the top, so really I might as well just continue it with these. To strip the end of this, all I do is measure the distance between the two pots and roughly the two pot lugs, and roughly strip that much off, give it a twist and a tin, and now I can slot one half of it, the end of it through the center lug. I haven't tinned that very well again. Don't know what's wrong with my tinning skills today, but seem to have. As you can see, this is a prime example of a mistake. If you don't tin your wire properly, you get like little bits that fray out the end, and it really makes it difficult to fit it through things like pots. So when you're tinning your wire, make sure you get all the way to the end, and then that way it will be almost like a solid core. In fact, it becomes a solid core, doesn't it, really? And then when you're putting it through the lug holes, it'll just slot straight through without any stray strands coming out or getting in the way. Now, before I bend it round, I soldered it in there to the first, or to pin number 2. I'll solder that in place, just so then our wire isn't going to move then when I'm bending it round to the next lug. So I can just simply lie this straight across and solder the two pot lugs together. Pot lugs? 2 lugs. there we are. Once I've tidied this up, that's wire number 1 in. And then I'm just going to repeat the process right the way around the edge of this board, remembering that 2 of these wires, these 2 here, are indeed for this capacitor. So I'm going to put them to one side, but the rest of them, I'll wire them all in now and make it nice and neat and tidy in here. And that's a bit better now that we've got all of our wires in. All that's left to do is attach these 2 capacitor leads. And these are going to go across to this cap here. So I'm going to run them round the back here and up to each end of this capacitor. Now this capacitor is non-polar, so it won't matter which one I attach where. So I'm just going to go ahead and link them up now. That's our clarity cap now wired up. I've put a bit of heat shrink over the ends. Cue all the internet audio files telling me how wrong I am putting a high-end capacitor in a pedal that's not worth that much money, considering these going amplifiers worth thousands of pounds. Well, do you know what? I would buy this pedal just knowing that it's in there, and I don't care if it makes a difference or not. It makes a difference to me because I hear with my eyes, and when I open this up and look inside, which I do with all of my pedals, by the way, I'll see that cap inside and I'll be made up that it's there, so I don't care. Anyway, moving on. Next, we're going to wire up this switch. So we've got our output to the pedal, which is going to come from this pot here. Then we've got our input and output of the circuit, of the whole pedal as a whole, rather than just the circuit, which is our input and output jacks. We've got the little bypass loop at the back, which I do always forget. And actually, do you know what? I'm getting better at this because I always say I do always forget that. I've started to not forget it, believe it or not. And then last of all, I'll come back and wire up the LED. Next stage is going to be to wire up, or the last stage I should say, is going to be to wire up our LED. I'm going to run a resistor from these 2 pins here on my 3-pole double throw switch through to the LED, and then I'm going to run a 9 volts from the LED round here and to the jack. Quick LED test does indeed turn on, so we're getting somewhere. Now I'm going to go ahead and put 1,000 of them paper cable ties in here, keep it all nice and neat. There's all of our cable ties in place, looking neat. I'm quite happy with how this one's turning out. Next step is going to be to add in our knobs. We've got 2 sets to choose from really. So the first set being the white cupcake knobs. I've got to say I really like how these ones look. I think this would be my personal preference maybe. And then the other set is the black bakelite. I've heard people refer to them as Gibson style knobs. I quite like these 2. I do think they'll look good in there, but I don't know. What do you think? What would you go for? I'm going to put the white ones on now for the sound sample, just because for me I feel like they look better. Now I know I've got a lot of flack in the past for not building any modulation pedals, so I hope you enjoyed that build. I certainly did. Does anyone think that the sound is going to be expensive or cheap? Now onto the sound test.